I wanted to hate the topping LA90 when it came in. It changed my mind. So today we're talking about the topping LA90 discrete amplifier. Is it good? Let's find out. Sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about the topping LA90 discrete. I've had kind of a weird relationship with topping. I've never really talked to any of their folks directly, but their products, I've reviewed a lot of topping products. A lot of them are good. Some of them are head scratchers, and most of the time it's a head scratcher because of the connections that they choose. Generally speaking, their products sound pretty good. However, there have been some instances of quality control issues. And not just me, but other people in my community as well as the internet. For the most part though, topping has always kind of pushed the envelope when it comes to Chinese brands like Gustard, like SMSL, definitely the upper tier of Chinese products. So what is the LA90 Discrete? Well, it is a speaker amp. It has 3 different inputs and a volume control. This amp can also be bridged, so it can be run in mono mode. And you're probably going to want to do that because it doesn't have a huge amount of power. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. I do this for a living, so it means the world to me. If you just hit the subscribe button, you can always come back and unsubscribe later. People do it all the time. And please like this video. It helps send it out into the cosmos, and I really appreciate that. So thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. This video may come off as being overtly critical, but stick till the end. May be worth it to watch this video in its entirety. Power supply is a little bit different. It is a brick style power supply as you would get with a printer or a lot of the other smaller Class D amplifiers. So it just looks like a laptop charger. This one comes in a 60 volt 4 amp flavor with somewhat of a, I wouldn't call it proprietary, it's an XLR input. So it has a slip ring. You plug it into the back and then you cinch it down. A little bit different, but I kind of like it because you don't have to worry about whether or not the power cable is securely connected to the back of the amp. With that said though, it does feel a little bit, I wouldn't say homemade, but it doesn't feel premium or it doesn't feel like it has been mass produced off the line. It looks like someone is taking it and screwing down the little XLR crimper thing. And that's probably what's happening. There's nothing wrong with that per se, but for a product that comes in at $800, you would think that there would be a little bit more of a refined power connection experience. Again, doesn't matter, not really, but it's one of those things that I always kind of felt was curious. There are 2 gain settings on the back, and really there's 4 gain settings because those gain settings are different when you're in stereo or when you're in mono. When you're in stereo, there's a 9.4 dB gain at the low setting and a 19.4 dB gain on the high setting. When in mono, it's a 15.4 dB gain at the low setting and a 25.4 dB gain at the high setting. What does that mean? Well, I mean, I think in theory, if you want the lowest noise possible, then you want to stay on the lower gain setting. But in my testing, I didn't really hear any difference at all between the low and the high gain setting. So I just left it in high gain because I like the juice, I like the power, I like the party. They also have a 12 volt trigger input, and they kind of go out of their way of like highlighting that, and that's great, but it should have a 12 volt trigger input, pretty much like any other amplifier out there. If you're not familiar with what a 12 volt trigger does, it basically turns on components. So you would hook it into another amp or a preamp or whatever, so you just turn on the preamp and then your amplifiers would turn on automatically. When you're dealing with separates, trigger inputs are awesome because you don't have to go turn everything on individually. And it would be a real pain if this was in a rack somewhere because there's no remote control. So a trigger input is necessary if you want to not hate this amplifier. There's also dip switches on the back, one of which puts it into pure power amplifier mode. So the volume control is not going to work, which is kind of cool. That's probably the way that I would use it. And then there is one for mono or stereo, and then there's the high gain or low gain setting. There's also a firmware update USB-C receptacle on the back. For inputs, there are 3 XLR or TRS inputs, which I don't particularly like. And I talked about this on the first LA90 review. I wish there was RCA inputs, and I get it. You can buy adapters. But for me, it's just kind of frustrating because there's plenty of real estate on the back. So I don't understand why it's only a balanced input. No other amplifier does that. And I get it, TRS is pro audio, blah, blah, this, blah, blah, that. But it still just bothers me that there's no RCA input. And I get it. They want to sell you their balanced gear to go with this, which kind of fits with it. I get it, but I wanted to use the Skit Lear as a preamp for this, and well, you can't because it doesn't have RCA inputs on the back. I think I do have some cables laying around that I could have made that happen, but it's the principle. Let's talk about power. This is where some people's heads are going to start spinning off because this thing actually doesn't make that much power in stereo. However, I think these are legit power ratings because otherwise, why wouldn't they be kind of stretching the truth a little bit? And this isn't even at 0.1 THD. 0.1 total harmonic distortion basically means how clean an amp is playing at a specific power level. I don't really care about 0.01. Less than 1% is somewhat of the industry standard as far as usable power. But in stereo mode, and they actually give the less than 10% DHD number, which is kind of not useful unless it's one bass hit. Anyway, it's 120 watts times 2 into 4 ohms at less than 10% THD. If you want to get less than 1%, it drops it down to 90 watts times 2 into 4 ohms. Not terrible. Not great, but not terrible. Here's where it gets kind of terrible. 66 watts times 2 at 8 ohms at 10% THD. And then it does drop down to 56 watts times 2 at 8 ohms at less than 1%. Usable power ratings. Most speakers are going to be able to be driven off of power ratings like this. Now, it does get better in mono mode, but it doesn't get better because then you're going to have to buy 2 of them. And that's going to be $1,600. Anyway, in mono mode, 220 times 1 into 8 ohms at less than 10%. 180 times 1 into 8 ohms at less than 1%. And then it doesn't give a 10% total harmonic distortion rate for the 4 ohm, but it's 180 times 1 into 4 ohms. So the power rating is the same for 4 ohm or for 8 ohm when you're in bridged or mono mode. Not going to light the world on fire as far as power level. I think, though, in the real world, that these power ratings are going to suffice. If you've got an incredibly inefficient speaker or something huge and big and you need just monstrous amounts of power, then this amp is not for you. Let's talk about how it sounds. When I did the first LA90, which is the non-discrete, so basically it's based on PCB, incidentally, that's not available anymore either, which is strange to me. So the one that is available now is the discrete version. The discrete version just means, discrete means separate, so separate caps, transistors, resistors, components based. Anyway, that's how they used to make things back in the day. 70s, 80s. I didn't want to like the LA90, but as soon as I turned it on and I listened to it, it's hard not to love the LA90. It's pretty much the same with the LA90 discrete. I don't have the LA90 anymore, so I can't directly compare it, but it sounds from memory to be the same thing. Incredibly low noise floor, huge soundstage, punchy bass, clean mid-range, natural highs, pretty much sets the standard for what an amplifier should sound like. Period. And it's kind of what I would call the house sound of some of these better topping amplifiers. Even the PA5, which is a Class D amplifier, has similar sonic characteristics. It doesn't hang with the LA90 discrete. At around $300, it's well, less than half as expensive as the LA90 Discrete. I don't think it puts out as much power, and I don't think you can bridge it. But the takeaway is the sonic sound similar. Just an amazing sound signature. I use tone controls a lot on pretty much everything that I listen to. This is one of those components where I don't feel like I need tone controls. It does everything that I want it to do from a sonic standpoint. And usually punchy bass is where I find a lot of amplifiers are lacking. And sometimes when you have punchy bass, you lose the clarity through the mid-range. And sometimes the top end can be harsh. This is just a natural sounding amplifier. The only other amplifier that I can really compare to this, and I know it's going to be crazy, is my Macintosh amplifier. And that's crazy. Now my Mac makes way more power than this does. It's a vintage Mac, 7270. But there is the same kind of vibe as really strong and palpable bass and a mid-range that has warm overtones but yet is still crystal clear, and then a top end that is just perfectly natural, realistic, and never forward at all. Actually, I think this sounds better than my Mac. Don't get mad at me, Steve. I'm sorry. But this amp, the LA90 Discrete, is very special. So what are my final thoughts? I've been doing a lot of heavy duty listening on amplifiers lately, and there's a track that I use a lot, and that's Give Me One Reason by Tracy Chapman. I use that track because it's easy to hear if there is any mid-range tomfoolery going on or any veiling of the mid-range. It's also somewhat dynamic, even with just the acoustic instruments. And her voice is transitioning from the lower mids into the upper mids. There's just a lot going on in the song if you really lean into it. I just got done doing a couple Class D amplifiers. It was the IEMA A07 Pro versus the Fuzzy Audio BT28. I'll put a link to that video right here because those are both great amplifiers and they're cheap. About 8 times less expensive as the LA90 Discrete. So one has to ask themselves, is the LA90 Discrete worth 8 times the amount of money as the A07 Pro or the BT20A Pro from Fuzzy Audio? And the answer is yes, unfortunately. It is 8 times better. And when I say better, I mean bigger soundstage. You can hear more music. And it seems more natural, much more natural. When I compared it to products similarly priced, the A1 monoblocks from Emotiva is an easy comparison. A1s have a lot more power. And I think if you have harder to drive speakers, then that's probably the direction you want to go. I don't feel like the A1s are as dynamic as the LA90 Discrete. I never listened to the LA90 Discrete in mono mode because I don't have 2 of them. So it could get even better. The LA90 Discrete's going to come in at a higher price point though for 2 of them compared to the A1 monoblocks from Emotiva. The other amp that I think sounds similar is the Schkit monoblocks, the Tears. I think the LA90 though has a bigger soundstage. It just feels bigger, feels more open when I hear the music. This is one of those situations where, again, I don't want to like the amplifier. And it only has 1 rating on Amazon. It's a 5-star rating, but it only has 1 of them. I'm not going to sit back and say, buy this amplifier, you're never going to have any problems with it. Because even anecdotally, some of my patrons that I've talked to have had issues with their topping equipment before. Heck, we had issues when we were at Expono with a topping DAC. But to disparage a product simply because some of the other products within the line aren't as reliable as we'd like isn't really fair. I'm saying it anyway, but I think people should be aware. Just make sure you buy it from a reputable outfit. I got this one from Apos. Apos is based in the US, and they will do returns, and they will do warranty work as well. If you're going to buy it, I'd buy it from Apos, because at least you have somebody that you can reach out to and help you out if there's any issues with it. Is something going to happen? Probably not. But if I'm spending $800 on a Chinese product, I want to make sure that I have some assurances. This may not be the amp for you. If you're into wattage per dollar, probably not. If you're into sound quality though, I think this is an outstanding amp. I had it paired with the Evo 4.1s from Wharfdale. I was easily pushing into the 90s, 90 dB, and this amp wasn't breaking a sweat. So even though it may be rated at lower wattage, I feel like there's more usable power here than a lot of amps that I've listened to. Yeah, so that's about it. It's a little wonky, but I can't argue with how this thing sounds. So if you want to support the channel, you can sign up for Patreon, patreon.com/cheapaudioman. Every Sunday night, we have Patreon-only Zooms, Patreon-only Discord group, Patreon-only Facebook group. You can also use the links in the description. Those are affiliate links, which means if you click and you buy the LA90 Discrete, I will get a commission, but it doesn't cost you any more, so it's a great way to support the channel. You can also buy me a cup of coffee down at the bottom of the video. There's a thanks button, but don't feel compelled to buy me anything. You can also sign up for Amazon Rune or Tidal. Links in the description. Click sign up. They do have a trial period, but even if you quit, I still get a couple of dollars. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Binge listen maybe through your really good sounding topping LA90 Discrete amplifier and fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.